Hello, guys. Good evening. I hope everyone is doing good today. And it is good to see you all back again for this continued video on the Python interview series. And today we will be covering the 13th video of this particular series. So, we have come till this far by your massive support and massive appreciation. So, with all gratefulness, let's jump into the video. And before we go in, who are we? We are Data Valley, the fastest growing edtech company of 2025. And what do we offer as a company? We can offer you IT solutions, trainings, and placement support. So, what do I mean by IT solutions? So, let's say you have a company and you are in the hunt of a talent pool. So, we have multiple or a plenty of skilled people who can meet your requirements of the skill sets that you're looking for, and you can equip them for your company. So, if not, let's say you need a place where you need to get trained. Yes, we do provide you with training support as well. And talking about training, I must say that we provide we provide training in multiple streams of subjects like data engineering, data science, data analytics, networking engineers, cybersecurity, ethical hacking, Java developer, Python developer, Selenium developer, uh, whatnot. We cover almost in demand subjects across our training institute. So please feel free to check out our website at datavalley.ai so that you will get a broad picture of how we teach, what is the duration, what's the price. You'll get a good idea about it. And then talking about placement, yes, we do provide you with 100% placement assistance. So if you're someone looking for on-job training and then placement, yes, we are the right fit for you. And not to boast, we are the fastest growing edtech company of 2025. Let's jump to the video now. Myself, Franklin, I've almost got 3+ years of experience as a data engineer, and I'm super happy to bring this video to you because it is not just about another video. It's about knowledge sharing. So myself, my friends who have been through the interviews, we get all these kind of complex and logical questions, and from that we have got this compilation, and I'm very glad to bring this to you. And today we are covering our 13th video of this series. And apart from all our previous videos, okay, so if you remember, within strings we had like total of 9 videos, and out of those 9 videos, the first 6 videos were about strings and the methods within the string, right? All the built-in methods within the string. And now for this Python interview series from now on, okay, especially for the strings, we are going to have the next 3 videos as a string operations. Okay, so I've got string operation part 1, part 2, and part 3. So we'll be having 3 string operations, and within these string operations we'll be covering multiple operations. Okay, so all the methods have been completed, and if you would like to get them revised, please check out our previous videos. So we have covered Python strings and their operations in 6 videos. And now we are beginning on our string operations. Okay. So the first operation that we are going to look in today is concat operation in the strings. So what do I mean by a string concatenation? A string concatenation in Python refers to the operation of combining 2 or more strings into a single new string. So what happens with the string concatenation is that, let's say you have 2 or more strings, okay? By using the concat operation, you'll be able to combine the strings and make one new single string, okay? So that's the point of using your concat operation. This process creates a new string object in memory. As strings in Python are immutable, meaning their content cannot be changed after creation. So what's happening is you'll be creating a new string, basically. Okay. For example, let's talk about the functionality. You want to perform a concatenation operation, or in other words, simple words, you want to combine 2 or more strings. You cannot modify your original string. But instead, what you do is you call in multiple strings, you combine them, and you create that in a new variable string object. And therefore, once your string is created again, you cannot perform any modifications or you cannot perform any mutability operations over it. Okay, so once you create it, no changes are allowed or no changes are actually possible. Okay, there are pretty much several ways how you combine a string, okay, or how you perform a string concatenation. Let's start from our first one, using the plus operator. So it's pretty much straightforward. All you'll be doing is you'll be using a plus operator. Okay, so plus as in your the mathematical plus. So how what happens is that this is a more straightforward way to concatenate strings, and by using this plus operator, what this plus operator will behave as, it will behave as a concatenation operator. Okay, what is a concatenation? It is a process where you combine, right, where you combine a string. So using this concatenation operator or a plus operator, you combine the string using this plus operator. Let's see how we implement this in the code. I've got here one string called as string1 hello, the next string called as string2 hello world, the string3 that is of an exclamation mark. So this is how my concatenation operation is going to be like. I'm creating a new variable string object, okay, which is called as combined string, and then I'm saying combine string1 plus string2 plus string3. So I want you to combine all these three different strings together. Okay, so now when you try to combine, okay, so now we are printing it. Now when you print this, you can see that you've got hello world, but there's a tiny difference. Though there is spaces here, okay, it doesn't matter. You will be creating a string that has no spaces. So does it actually matter? If you ask me, let's say I just put string1 plus string2 and then I've got space here. Does it matter? No changes. No, it doesn't matter actually. So hello world all combined together. But what if I want to create a string, okay, that has spaces in between them? There are, I mean, different ways. For example, the most easiest would be, okay, I'll explain the easiest one next. So what you can do is the same string, okay, string1 is equal to hello, string2 is equal to world. And what I'm doing here is I'm calling in a new variable string object called combined string. And to that, I'm calling in my string1 and string2. But if you notice here, I've got here an empty string with an white space. So if you notice here, you can see that I've got a white dot here, right, which is in white space. I've got a space. So what I'll do is I'm calling my string1, I'm calling my string2, but in between them, I've got a white space here. And now when I run this, you can see that I've got a new string called combined string, which has space in it, okay? Hello space world. So by default, you will not be getting any spaces. So all you gotta do is you have to create, or you have to create a string with addition of spaces in between them. So how do you do that? You call in an empty string with the white space. What is the other way? The other way is, I mean, not, I wouldn't suggest this, but you have to know what are the other ways. I've got string1 is equal to hello and string2 is equal to world. But there is a slight difference. In here, it just hello with no spaces at the end. But in this trailing end, if you notice, I've got a space here, right? You can see a space there, like a dot. So that refers to a white space. So what happens is that if I give a string combination with spaces already in place, then it is possible to get a new string with hello world with space in between them. There are key considerations that we need to know about. Okay, so the plus operator does not automatically add spaces or separators. You must explicitly include them if desired using the plus is equal to operator. Okay, that is an augmented assignment. So what's happening here, the plus operator will not give you any kind of additional spaces or a separator. What you have to do is, uh, you have to explicitly mention if you need a space, okay, either at the trailing end or by using an empty string with a space in it. Okay, so these are the explicit methods how you can include a space within your string. And then let's see how we can come up with the using plus is equal to operator. Okay, this is an augmented assignment. So a plus is equal to operator can be used to append a string to an existing string variable. This is a shorthand for variable is equal to variable plus other string. So either you can call in a plus operator, okay, which is going to combine two strings, or you can use plus, or you can use plus is equal to operator all together. Okay, so how is it different? Let's see that in practicality. Okay, so let's say I've gotten here message is equal to good, and now instead of calling a new string, okay, or a variable, you can call it however in this context, okay, only in this context. So what I'll do is I'll call in a message, and then I'm using plus is equal to operator, and I'm having a new string called as morning. So now when I print this, you can see that I've got good morning here. Okay, so but there is one key thing you need to know about this, like how we don't get an automatic spacing with our plus operator. Same with your plus is equal to operator, you wouldn't be getting an space by default. So you might be wondering, how did I get a space here? I got it because in front of morning I've got a white space here. You see that? So I'll show you the default behavior now. The default behavior is that no space. Okay. So whenever you need to create a string with a space, either use the default spacing in your trailing or your leading end of your string, or you can use an concatenation with an empty string with a space in it. Now to our second method. The second method is dot join method. So we already learned about this in our string method, right? So what does a join method do? The join method helps you to join all your substrings or items within a string, right? So by definition, the join method is highly efficient for concatenating multiple strings, especially when they are stored in an iterable like a list or a tuple. So what's happening here? You are trying to combine or concatenate multiple strings, especially when they are stored in as an iterable. So what is an iterable? An iterable is something where you can iterate again and again. So what do I mean by an iterate? Iterate is where you will be able to repetitively access the elements from a particular iterable. Okay, so it's a process of accessing your element one by one. So for example, an iterable is like a list or a tuple or a string. Even string is an iterable. Okay, so this is highly efficient when you're trying to concatenate multiple strings, especially when they're stored as an iterable. Okay, it concatenates the elements of the iterable using the string on which the method is called as a separator. So the elements are concatenated, okay, using the string on which the method is called as a separator. So whatever the separator that you provide, your concatenation will happen based on that. Let's see that in the code implementation. So I've got words is equal to Python is awesome. So it is a list of strings, right? So Python comma is comma awesome. So now using join method, you all know the syntax by now, right? If you have paid attention to my previous videos. So I'm calling in a separator. So this is the operator. Sorry, this is the separator I want in between my words. Okay, for example, Python and is. So in between the Python and is, I want a space. So how do I do that? I do that by calling in a separator here. And then I'm calling my join method. And to which iterable am I running it? I'm running it to my words, right? Now when I run it, you can see that I've got Python is awesome. How? By using the join method and the operator in here. Next off, just to show you an example, instead of a white space, I'll show you with a hyphen. So that you understand the difference here. Now when I run this, I've got Python is awesome. So what's the separator here? The hyphen. So that is how you can know. So basically instead of this hyphen, if you replace it with a space, you will get a sentence like this. Okay. Next off, I'm just showing an example again. So I've got data is equal to name, comma Alice, comma age, comma 30. And now what I'll do here is I'll call a colon and then space. Okay. So does it matter, or is that like I can use only a single operator? No. You can have multiple different separators. Okay. So it's not necessarily that you can provide only one semicolon or a plus or a hyphen. No, you can have any kind of separator that you want. So for example, see here, name Alice, age 30. So it's a matter of what separator do you want. For example, what if this is an integer? Would it work? Let's try to work it out. No. So as long as you have only the integer, you are fine. But if we have any kind of different types, then your string concatenation will not happen. Okay, that will result out in type error. Okay, cool. And next off, the third method is using the f strings. So what do you do in f strings? So f strings are all otherwise called as formatted string literals. The f string provides a concise and readable way to embed expressions inside string literals, implicitly performing concatenation. So what you're doing, you are doing an indirect concatenation. And how are you doing that? By embedding different expressions or a different values. So I'll show you an example without f little. Okay, I've got here a name is equal to Bob and age is equal to 25. So I've got two variables, right? And now I'm creating a new a string variable object called as greeting. And to that, I'm calling hello, comma, placeholder name, exclamation mark, you are placeholder age years old. Now, if I print this, will I be printing it properly? No. Why is that? Because I'm calling it without the F literal. So what happens if I use F literal is that this particular placeholder, so now if you see they are acting as an string, right? They are just acting as a string, so it doesn't matter even if I use whatever letters or whatever numbers or whatever symbols I use, they all act as an string. But what happens if you use a f string as that? So to specify an f string, you just call an f. Now when I call this using the f string literal, you can see that I've got hello comma Bob, you are 25 years old. So how is this different to this one? It's all a matter of using an f string literal. So when you call in a formatted string literal, this becomes like your variable. Okay, in here it was acting as a string, but in here within the placeholder it acts as a placeholder for your variable. Okay, so name and age, and that is being called here. Now using the dot format method, the dot format method allows for more complex string formatting and substitution. which effectively concatenates value into a template string. So what happens in your dot format method is that you especially use it for your complex string formatting and substitution, which effectively concatenates value into a template string. So whatever the formatting or a substitution that you have, those will be placed in your placeholders. So within the dot format method, I think we learned it just yesterday. We have different varieties, right? Like indexed, we have positional, we have keyword, and we have key based, right? So we have different dot format method. For example, let's try to learn it with the positional argument. So I've got item is equal to laptop, price is equal to 1200. And I'm calling in a new variable object called description. And then I'm calling it the placeholder cost dollar placeholder. So what are these placeholders for? These placeholders can take in a value or an expression. And now I'm using dot format method, and then I'm specifying the positional arguments here. So item and price. So what does this item represent? It represents laptop. What does this price represent? It represents the value here. So now when I call this in the description, okay, I'm printing this by using the dot format method. The values are printed there. So the laptop costs $1,200. So that is the order. But what would happen if I call it different? So in here, instead of item comma price, what I've done, I've just changed it price comma item. So now when I call this, you can see that the 1200 costs dollar laptop. Does it make sense? No. But Python will take it as it is. So whatever the positions that you supply, those positional values are placed in the positional placeholder number. Okay. There are few key considerations that you need to know. First of all, a string is immutable. Because strings are immutable, the string concatenation always results in a new string object. And especially for frequent or large scale concatenations, especially with the plus operator, this can lead to performance overhead due to repeated object creation. So what you're doing, so for your frequent, and you, let's say you have a large scale concatenation to be performed. So if you use the plus operator or a concatenating operator, that would result in a performance overhead. Why is that? Due to repeated object creation. Then talking about the efficiency, for concatenation, a large number of strings. Okay, for concatenating of a large number of strings. Dot join method is generally the most efficient due to its optimized internal implementation. So when you use the dot, for example, when you use the dot join method, that is more efficient. Okay, even if it is large number. Why is that? Because your dot join method is optimized for internal implementation. Then let's talk about the type compatibility. The plus and plus is equal to operators only work with string operands. Attempting to concatenate a string with a non-string type will raise a type error unless the non-string type is explicitly converted to a string using string casting. F-strings and dot format method handle type conversion automatically. So what they're trying to address is that when you're trying to perform your concatenation using plus or plus is equal to operator, your string conversion has to be done by you. And if you are not having any string conversion in place, then you might be resulted with an error. So we earlier saw that, right? So when we try to perform a concatenation for a string and an integer, it resulted out in an error, type error. So similarly, that would you would result in a type error, especially when you're using plus and a plus is equal to operator. But exception is that plus string, f strings and format method. So if you use the format method and f string literals, then your type conversion is handled automatically. For example, talking about the type conversion, let me show it. So I've got a is equal to Frank, which is a string, and b is equal to 2, and now I have casted it to a string format, right? String, and in within bracket I put 2. Now when I try to run this, then that is fine. But what would happen if I try to run without the conversion, without type conversion? Now when I try to run this, sorry, I have to remove this. I'll be I'll be resulted out with an type error. Okay, so be sure about this error within. And now, how do you perform string repetition? So what is a string repetition in place? So you all know what is a repetition, right? Repetition is something where you repeat a particular value again and again. Not necessarily a value, but it can be anything. It can be anything like a string. A string can be repeated multiple times. So the string repetition operation allows for the creation of a new string by creating an existing string a specified number of times. And the operation is achieved using the multiplication operator. So what is our concatenation operator? That was a plus sign. And same for your repetitive operation or a multiplication operator or a repetition operator, you use an asterisk. Okay, this is how you multiply in Python, right? It's an asterisk, but you can just call it as a multiplication operator. So what happens is that for your existing string, you call it with the multiplication operator and then an integer value. So based on that number of times, your new string is created. Let's talk about the mechanism. When the multiplication operator is used with a string and an integer, it acts as a repetition operator. The string is repeated as many times as the integer value indicates, resulting in a new string that is concatenation of the original string repeated. So you will be creating a new string. Okay, so whatever your original string is, you call it, and then to that particular string, you repeat as many times as your integer value indicates. So you give a integer value and then you create a new string. That is a concatenation of your original string repeated. The syntax, it is not necessarily a syntax, but this is your format. Okay, so whatever your repeated string is, so you're calling it in a new variable string object, and the syntax is original string into integer value. So whatever your string is, you multiplied it with an integer value, or vice versa. You call the integer value first and then your original string. But does it matter? No. The order of the string and the integer does not affect the outcome. So basically what you're doing, you call in your string and then you multiply it as many times by providing an integer value. Let's start with a basic repetition. So I've got a string here saying that string to repeat is equal to Python. Okay. So I want to multiply this Python. And now what I'm doing, I'm creating a new string object called as repeated string 1 is equal to string to repeat. So string to repeat in here is Python, right? Multiplied by an integer value 3. Now what happens? So in here now I'm getting Python, Python, Python. So one thing is very sure here, that you will not be getting a space by default. So what you can do for a space then? So what you can do is you can just add a space at the trailing end of your string. When I do this, now you can see that I've got Python, Python, Python with a space at the trailing end of each word. To give a short explanation, the string Python is repeated 3 times, resulting in Python, Python, Python. and repetition happens with no spaces. Okay, now let's talk about the repetition with spaces in string. Yes, we saw that earlier, but yes, I've got it separately as well. So in here it's saying, right, I've just added a space to my trailing end, and now I'm calling against a multiplication operator, and then I'm stating my integer value. So now what happens, I've got Python with the space at the trailing end of each word. To give an explanation, the string Python including the trailing space is repeated 4 times, ensuring spaces between the repeated instances of Python. Okay, so whatever my original instance was, so Python space, it has repeated 4 times, and therefore I've got a space after my each word. Now let's talk about the repetition with the number 0. So what would happen? We learned about an integer value, we used an integer value, and therefore we have got a number, right? We got a different values based on my integer number. Now what would be the scenario if I multiply it with a 0? The behavior is simple. What would happen if you multiply a number with 0? You'll be getting 0, right? Similarly, when you try to multiply a string with a value 0, you'll be returned with an empty string because there is nothing to return. So if you are multiplying ABC with 1, you are getting it once. For example, if you are multiplying it by twice, you are getting it 2, right? So the behavior when you are trying to multiply with an value 0, then you will be returned with an empty string. Multiplying a string by 0 results in an empty string. Okay, positive integer, yes, we know it now. You know about the value with 0. Now, what would be this scenario if you try to if you try to have a multiplication with a negative number? If you are trying to multiply, so if you see here, right, I've got -2, which is a negative value. So what would happen? Same with our 0 value. What happens is that we'll be returned with an empty string. Okay, so unlike our Python or unlike our numeric terms, okay, where you try to multiply a value with -2, you'll be getting an corresponding negative value, right? But with strings, when you're trying to multiply with a negative value, you will be returned with an empty string. So similar to 0, multiplying a string by a negative integer also results in an empty string. Cool. Python treats negative repetitions count as equivalent to 0 for this operation. Now, let's talk about the multiplication with some separators. Why am I going to explain this? Because separators are a key thing for your pattern printing. So what is this pattern printing? Why is it necessary? In most scenarios, when you go for an interview, there are chances that the interviewer might test you the knowledge with the separators or the pattern printing, in other words. Why specifically? So for example, the interviewer might ask you, print a pyramid with the asterisk. So they'll ask you to print an pyramid pattern. So do you know how to do it? So this is a fundamental basic, okay? That's why I've taken in the separator and their multiplication. They might ask you to print an inverse pyramid. They might ask you to print a square shape. So how are you going to do that? So even for that use case scenario, you use a multiplication operator. For example, first off, I've got here separator is equal to hyphen into 20, right? I've got a multiplication operator with 20. So now if I see here, I've got hyphen that is repeated 20 times. In other words, not just for pattern printing. Let's say you want a particular string with a particular length. Even in that case, you can use this printing pattern. For example, I want a space and I want to multiply it by 20. Okay. Now, this is not an empty string, but I've got something here. So this is an empty string with white spaces. Okay, just because you cannot see it, you just because you cannot see it doesn't mean that the string is non-existent. So similarly, when I give an asterisk and multiply, I've got a string that is of length 20. And now let's talk about the pattern. So I've got another pattern here with an asterisk and an hyphen. So when I talk about the multiplication operator, it doesn't mean that it will take only one value. Okay, it can take multiple values to it. Okay, so you'll take multiple values. So I can give even multiple different designs, like, for example, I can add more asterisk. So now when I print this, you can see that I've got a pattern here, right? So this is a different pattern and this is a different pattern. And for this pattern, we have included multiple values. So there is no fixative values like you have to just provide one separator. You can have as much as separators as possible. This demonstrates how string repetition can be used to easily generate visual separators or simple patterns. So we are creating an visual pattern, right? So for that case, you can use this multiplication operator. Let's talk about the key characteristics. The repetition operation always produces a new string. It does not modify the original string in place. So though you might call the multiplication operator, you're not going to create any, or sorry, you're not going to modify your original string. But all you're going to do is you're going to create a new string with the repetition operation that has taken place. And after this functionality has happened, then you will be creating a string. So you're not modifying once your string has been created, but rather you are modifying something and then creating a string. The integer multiplier. The multiplier must always be an integer. Attempting to multiply a string by another string or a floating point number will result in a type error. So if you are trying to multiply with an with a decimal value or a floating number, right? For example, let's say I'm trying to multiply with 2.5, which is a float number. In that case, I'll be resulted out with an type error because your multiplication will happen only with an integer value. Okay, not string, not float type, anything. In that case, you'll be written with an type error. Multiplying a string by 0 results in an empty string. So always try to use an positive integer value, because even if you are trying to multiply with an 0, it will result in an empty string which has no purpose. Negative repetition. Multiplying a string by negative integer also results in an empty string. So just like that, you will be getting an empty string even if it is 0 or a negative string, negative integer. Let's talk about the use case. Generating a pattern or a separator. So we learned just now, right? So for example, if you print with the hyphen 20, so you will be able to create a pattern out of it. A pattern that has only hyphens with a length of 20. And then creating repeated sequence of characters for formatting or visual display. So if you are having a repeated pattern of, like, let's say hyphen or an asterisk, they are going to be a visual display, right? So for example, let's say you have a multiple print statement, and within these print statement you can include these kind of pattern printing as well, so that your print statements are differentiated between each other. For initializing strings with a specific length and content, for example, you need a string that is of length 20. For example, you need a string that is of length 50. So how do you do that? You can try to initialize a string with a specific length and content by using a repetitive behavior. Okay, simple. All right, cool. So these are the functionalities for your repetitive behavior. And user has asked me which project you're doing. Hi, Aya. So what project am I doing? So Talking about the Python context, I think my project doesn't matter. But if you'd like to stay in touch with me, do check out my LinkedIn page at Franklin Florence. Okay, my username is Franklin Florence. So if you try to look in for me there, we'll discuss what kind of projects I'm doing. This is of a generic topic. I don't want to discuss that in our Python interview series. But if you have any doubts in regards to the Python interview series that we are looking on, feel free to have your comments. I'll address them for sure. All right. Now, back to our topic. Can you explain indexing operations on Python strings? So, what is an index? So, all your values within a string are going to have an index number, right? Your first string will have, for example, your string, and a character in a string will have an index value. All right. So, that is your index position or your index value. Indexing in Python strings allows for accessing individual characters or substrings by their position within the string. So, for example, you need to access a particular element, or you would like to access an element based on an index position. So, what you do, you provide an index value, and your Python code runs, and it will fetch the particular character at a particular position. So, indexing in Python allows for accessing the individual characters or a substring. So you can also call in multiple elements as well, not just a single element. Strings are ordered sequences and each character, okay, sorry. Strings are ordered sequences and each character is assigned a numerical index. What do I mean by strings or ordered indexes? Let's say you have a string called as Frank. So F is going to have a position 0, R will take 1, A will take 2, N will take 3, and K will take 4, right? So each character will have an unique number to it. So for a single character at a particular position, they'll just get one index value. Okay, the characters might be repetitive, but the index value is never repetitive, and for each of your character you will get a different index number. Let's talk about the positive indexing. The positive indexing starts from 0 for your first character, 1 for the second, and so on. So what happens is that for your element at the first position, we all know about the positive indexing, right? In Python, your indexing position starts from 0 and not from 1. So when you are trying to use your, when you're trying to access an element, okay, make sure that you call it from the beginning. So don't think that we can just call one and your first element comes in. No, it doesn't happen that way. If you need to access an element, especially the first element, it has to start from 0. And all your further elements are given a number plus 1 at each go. So your second element is given number 1. Your third element is given the position number 2. Position number 3 or an index number 2. Your fourth positional element is given the index number 3. Okay, so it goes on. The index increases one by one for each subsequent character. So for each character next to each other, they are never going to have the same index. So each index value for your subsequent character increases one by one. To access a character, the index is placed within a square bracket after the string variable. So to access a particular element, how do you do that? You place a suitable number within a square bracket. Okay, so as you see here, I've got a square bracket. So within the square bracket, we have to put in a numeric value or an index value with which your particular element will be able to access. So I've got here something called as my string Python, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to access it based on my numerical position. And for positive indexing, it must always start from 0. So it goes from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So now what I'll do is, for this particular string Python, I'm going to access it based on the index position. So my string square bracket 0, my string square bracket 2. Now when I call this and when I try to print it, it gives me that first character P is 0. So 0 represents my first character, right? And I'm calling my index number 2. What is that 2? So 0, 1 and 2. What is that 2? T. So now it prints P and T for me. Okay, this is how you use your positive indexing. Now let's talk about our negative indexing. Why do we use negative indexing? We use negative indexing to access the elements from the end of our string. Okay, so for example, you need to access the last element of your string. So to access your first element, what do? You use positive indexing, and maybe you can call it with 0, and the 0 will return your first element. Let's say you do not know what is your last element, and let's say you also don't know the length of your element. For example, you have a string that is of size 1000. How do you access the last element then? Would you run 1000 times and try to find what is the last element? No, right? The simple and easiest way is to use -1, which is going to get the last element from your string. So I've got my string is equal to Python. And now what I'm doing, I'm using -1 here. Okay. But before that, let's jump to our definitions as well. So your negative indexing starts from -1 for the last character, for the -2 for the second to last, and so on. So in positive indexing, we learn that it goes from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And quite opposite, to access the elements from your last positioning, it starts from -1 and it travels to -1, -2, -3, -4 from your last position. Okay, this provides a convenient way to access characters from the end of the string without knowing its exact length. So if you do not know the exact length of your string, and if you'd like to access the last element, you just specify -1. All right. Now if you see here, I've got a bracket. So bracket you must use to access your element. Okay, without specifying your square bracket, you cannot access your element. So make sure that you specify the square bracket, and within the square bracket I'm mentioning -1, which is my last element. And next I've gotten here -2, which will be accessing my second element from my last. Now when I print this, you can see that I've got n and o. Is that right? Yes, let's try to check it out. So n is -1 and o is -2. So I've got n and o. That is right. Now let's try to check our element based on index error. Sorry, I don't know why I said that. So now there are chances that you might be getting index error. So we learned about positive indexing, we learned about negative indexing. So positive indexing, you'll be able to access your element from the beginning, and negative indexing, you'll be able to access your element from the end or your trailing end of your string. Now, with index error, what happens is that when you're trying to access an element that is outside the valid range of your string. What do I mean by the valid range of a string? Let's say your string is of a size 7. So the range would be 0 to 6, right? The positional index. A size of 7, but index value of 0 to 6, which will again, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which will give us a length of 7. If I try to access any elements out of this range, for example, let's say I'm trying to access an index 8, but is index 8 present? Do we have that range? No, we do not have that range. And in that case, what happens is that we'll be thrown out with an index error. Attempting to access an element that is outside the valid range of the string. Example, an index larger than or equal to the string's length, or a negative index that goes beyond the beginning of the string. will raise an index error. So not just positive integer value, even if you're trying to access an element with your negative index, but it goes beyond the range, even in that case, you'll be raised with an index error. Now let's see that in practicality. So I've got here my string is equal to Python. Let's check the length of our original string, okay, Python, right? The length is 6. Now what I'll do is I'm trying to access an element at 10. But do I have that much elements? The size is only 6. So when I try to run 10, what should happen? I'll be thrown out with an index error. So let's see here. It has given me an index error. And what does it say? String index out of range. So if you are trying to access an element out of the range, you will be always thrown out with an index error. Now let's talk about the immutability. We all know that our string is immutable, which in other words that you cannot alter it, you cannot change it. Now what would happen actually if you try to access an element from your index position or if you try to alter it? So let's see an example. It is important to note that the Python strings are immutable. This means that once a string is created, its individual characters cannot be changed directly. Using indexing or slicing for assignment, attempting to do so will result in a type error. Okay, I've got here a list. Why am I getting a list? I just want to show the difference between mutability and immutability. So I've got a list here saying A, B, C. Okay, now when I print my list, you can see that this is my list, right? A, B, C. And now when I try to access the first element, it gives me B, right? So what do I mean by first element? It's the positional index. So 0, 1, and 2. So what is that position 1? I've got B, right? 0 and this is 1. So what if I try to change it? So now what I'm doing, I'm accessing the element. My list at 1, I want you to change it to F is equal to F, right? So it's an assigning character. Now you can see that I've got AFC. So what was my original string? ABC. And now I've got ABC. Sorry, AFC. So I was able to change my string. Now let's try the same with our strings. I've got my string is equal to hello. And I'm trying to print my element at 0. So what is my element at 0? Hello. So H is our element at 0. Fine, we got that. Now what I'll do is I'll try to alter my string with H into J. So what I want to do is instead of hello, I want to change it to jello. Okay, I'm changing my H to J. So what will happen is it'll raise a type error. So my string, so similar if you see in list, when I try to change, okay, my list 1 is equal to F. It didn't show me any error, it just printed it. But now when I try to assign it, my string at this position 0, change it to J, it will raise a type error. Alright? Okay, to modify a string, a new string must be created and assigned to the variable. So there are two ways. First thing, so I've got a string here called hello world, hello Python. And I'm going to print it with the original string. Okay, I'm printing it. If I print it, I'll be getting hello world and hello Python. That is my original string. Now what I'll do is I'll try to use a method called replace method. So replace method will take in my old value and my new value, right? So new string is equal to original string dot replace method, and I'm stating my old value, which is H, and my new value J. Now what would happen? Would it throw out an error? No, it wouldn't throw out an error because I'm creating a new string object here, right? New variable, new string is my new string object. Now when I try to call it, it gives me Jello world, Jello Python, right? So I've replaced my original string values with a new value. So instead of H, I've changed it to capital J. There is another easy way. All you can do is call in a new variable. Instead of hello, just type in Jello. Okay, I just put in there for fun here because once you create a string, you will not be able to change it. So when you create a string, make sure that the change that you need is already in place. So this is how you create a new string. So you will not be able to change it. So what are these operations that we learned today? So we learned about indexing operations, where you will be able to access an element or a substring of your particular string, right? That is your indexing operation. And then we learned about the repetitive behavior or a repetition operation in our string. So we use an multiplication operator, and if you're trying to use a positive integer, yes, you'll be getting the multiplication happening. But if you try to call in with 0 or a negative integer, then you'll be thrown out with negative value. Sorry, you'll be thrown out with an empty string. And then at first we learned about concatenation operation. So what is a concatenation operation? Concatenation operation is a combining method. So where you try to combine two or more strings together. We use plus operator, we use dot format method, we use f string literal. So there are different ways to create your string with the concatenation process. So that is all for today. I hope this video was very useful to you. And if you like the video, do not forget to give a thumbs up. And if you have any questions, do not forget to put your questions in the comment sections. I will surely address it now or in my future videos when I look at them. And there is a bell icon next to the page name. If you click that, you will not miss out on any regular updates. So if you don't want to miss out on any videos, click on the bell icon. So who are we? We are Data Valley, the fastest growing edtech company of 2025. And thank you for attending this session. And if you'd like to get in contact with us, we have got multiple headquarters at US, UK, and Hyderabad as well. Also, we have got 4 centers in Hyderabad. So feel free to ring to one of this number, and one of our colleagues will be happy to help you with your career progression. And this is Franklin signing off for today. I'll meet you in the next video. Okay? And talking about the trainings, we provide you training in multiple subjects like Python, Java, Selenium, SQL developer, database administrator, data engineering, data analytics, data science, ethical hacking, cyber security, whatnot. So please feel free to check out our streaming subjects in our website, and you'll be getting a good idea about how we can help you with your career progression. Also, a good news is that if you are a regional speaker of either Telugu or Tamil, you can check out our channels at Data Valley Tamil or Data Valley Telugu. So we have a channel where you will be able to learn the same concepts in Tamil as well or Telugu. So you can check out that as well. So this is Franklin signing off. Good evening, and I hope you all have a good rest for today. And if you have any doubt, feel free to check out the video again and again, and you'll be getting a good idea over the concepts. Thank you so much. This is Franklin signing off. Take care.